It has happened again. There has been another cheating scandal at the Albuquerque Police Department.
This time, a high-ranking officer in the chief's office scammed the system for an entire year, pocketing tens of thousands of dollars, and nobody at APD noticed. Tonight, the results of a 6-month Larry Barker investigation, the Time Bandit.
It's huge. I mean, this puts a black eye on APD. There's no doubt about it.
There was something going on here that is totally disturbing.
Yet again, there's another APD overtime abuse scandal, and that's what this is.
It's an issue that's plagued Albuquerque police for years. Since 2014, there have been a half-dozen investigations into APD abuse of overtime. Last year, following the 7th probe in 8 years, State Auditor Brian Condone blasted APD for failure to take corrective action.
Time and time again, leadership at APD and the city of Albuquerque clearly ignored the findings that were presented in those 6 prior audits and reports. Enough's enough. The city of Albuquerque and APD have got to get it right.
Police officials vowed a crackdown on overtime.
Privately, however, police officials were hiding a troubling secret. It involved internal affairs investigations, high-level wrongdoing, disciplinary action, and officer firing, and overtime misdeeds that bilked APD out of tens of thousands of dollars.
Is it fair to call this a shameful chapter at APD's history?
Yes, and I'm embarrassed that for the department in this stage. It definitely is shameful.
Former Police Chief Mike Geyer reviewed the internal affairs investigation.
From what I reviewed, I mean, these were almost daily occurrences, going 7 days a week, 24/7. I would say that it definitely is the worst I've seen. On so many different levels, this is wrong.
How does this happen in the chief's office?
It happens because nobody's held accountable. The buck doesn't stop with anybody. It just gets passed around.
Tom Grover is an attorney and former APD officer. He reviewed the case files.
It's as big a deal as you can get because that's the issue, is that there's indifference to wrongdoing, especially at the higher levels.
To understand what happened, we need to go back to early 2020 and the first days of the pandemic. Lieutenant Jim Edison is brought in to lead APD's COVID response. Working out of the chief's office, Edison was responsible for coordinating testing, contact tracing, stats, emails, and phone calls. Over the course of 1 year on the job, Lieutenant Edison earned almost $250,000. That's more than the police chief, the mayor, even the governor.
How did he pull it off? Well, he cheated on his overtime, lining his pockets with illicit pay practically every day for a year. And even though Edison flagrantly violated a host of rules, regulations, and policies, APD's brass signed off on it, simply looking the other way.
From April 2020 to April 2021, Edison claimed $133,000 in dubious overtime payments.
Call-out overtime is paid to off-duty officers who are called back to work outside the regular shift. For example, if there's a murder at 2 a.m., the homicide detective who goes to the crime scene will be paid time and a half for reporting to duty in the middle of the night.
Lieutenant Edison's job in the chief's office was primarily administrative desk work. However, on a daily basis, even weekends, the lieutenant padded his pay with thousands of hours in what's known as call-out overtime. For example, every time Edison listened to a voicemail and sent it to somebody else to investigate, he claimed 2 hours overtime. On January 8th, 2021, Edison went to Lowe's and took an hour overtime. January 13th, he claimed a half-hour OT to find out who parked in a deputy chief's parking place. Saturday, January 16th, his day off, Edison hit up APD 12 hours in time and a half call-out overtime for making phone calls and sending emails. January 22nd, the lieutenant documented 7 minutes of off-duty work and claimed 8 hours overtime. Sunday, January 31, Edison accounted for 22 minutes of work and claimed 10 and a half hours overtime. Tuesday, February 2nd, the lieutenant emailed some stats to a deputy chief and claimed 2 hours OT. The list goes on and on, practically every day for a full year.
Were Lieutenant Edison's duties consistent with earning call-out overtime?
No, they weren't. So in essence, he was creating his own overtime cash register.
He abused his position for his own enrichment. That's totally abusive conduct. That's not overtime call-out. That's overtime abuse.
A social media post launched an internal affairs investigation. Among the findings, Lieutenant Edison violated rules, regulations, and codes of conduct by cheating on his overtime. He was handed a 2-week suspension. And after he continued to misrepresent his time, there was a second IA investigation. In October, Lieutenant Jim Edison was fired. Now, the lieutenant's supervisor was Deputy Chief Mike Smathers. Even though Edison's overtime clearly violated department policy, Smathers signed off on the inappropriate pay anyway.
Based on the documents that you've reviewed, what did he do that was wrong?
At best, he failed to supervise. At worst, he's incompetent to hold his position because he just was ambivalent about it, or didn't even recognize the abuse that was going on.
Internal Affairs investigators concluded Deputy Chief Smathers violated multiple rules and regulations by failing to review Edison's timesheets. Smathers received a 1-day suspension.
I'm appalled. I couldn't believe it when I first read it. Deputy Chief receiving that minimal disciplinary action for such major offenses just boggles my mind.
In the second Internal Affairs probe, investigators concluded Smathers again violated APD policy. He was handed a written reprimand.
It was an appropriate discipline for those violations.
Eric Garcia is the acting superintendent for police reform.
Chief Smathers took responsibility. He did not give misleading statements. He was truthful. He admitted he should have done more.
Up here on the 5th floor of the police department, we're so busy that to go through the fine details of looking through somebody's timesheets is not something that we're going to be carving out time for. Jim Edison deceived Deputy Chief Smathers, and Deputy Chief Smathers took accountability for that and was disciplined.
It's extremely concerning, extremely concerning.
Luis Sanchez is a retired APD officer and an Albuquerque city councilor.
If we've had 7 investigations and we still can't get it right, then something is definitely broken within the system. It's our job to ask those questions as city councilors, as a checks and balances system, to make sure that the public's money is being spent the right way.
Deputy Chief Mike Smathers declined to be interviewed. Jim Edison did not respond to our request for an interview. The case has been referred to an outside agency for a criminal investigation. The former APD cop has not been asked to repay the department. So, why should we care if a ranking police officer cheats on his overtime?
Because first, it's their tax dollars being wasted. But significantly, and I think more importantly, it has to do with the integrity of the people running the state's largest police department.
Larry Barker, KRQE, News 13.